Hello and welcome back to another video. In this one we'll be recapping the Battle of Velyka Novosilka because I believe it is one very well executed battle by the Russians to gain control over the town and encircling Ukrainian forces. But it is partly due to the Ukrainian refusal to withdraw that allowed for the Russian encirclement. Nonetheless, we'll be taking a look at the recap with help of this recap by RUAF, where they animated the capture of Velyka Novosilka according to how it happened. If we take a look at Velyka Novosilka, we see that the Russians first started attacking the towns to the southwest of Velyka Novosilka and capturing the positions north and east of Velyka Novosilka to align the front line as it is appearing on the screen. With control over the western supply line and the northern and northeastern supply lines, there were no roads left for the Ukrainians to send reinforcements or to withdraw their forces through. Instead, the only area where they could move through was the open fields to the northwest, where they'd have to cross a river line into open fields before they could withdraw to the defensive lines of the Ukrainians in the northwest. This meant that while the Ukrainians did have the ability to withdraw, they would have to do so under little to no cover and with limited usage of vehicles, especially armored vehicles. This meant it was practically impossible for the Ukrainians to withdraw their forces, and their forces were operationally encircled in the majority of the battle over the town itself. The Russians, prior to entering Neskushne itself, had already cut off the roads both to the north, northeast, and to the west. This left the Ukrainian positions to be the southern parts of Velyka Novosilka, the central parts of Velyka Novosilka, the northeastern parts of Velyka Novosilka, the western parts near Vremivka, and Neskushne itself. The Russian forces had already captured Blagodatne, Makarivka, and Storosheve at the end of December 2024. At the start of 2025, the Russians began the battle over the town itself. The Russians already had a foothold in the eastern parts of the town at the end of 2024, and this meant that the road towards the town itself was open with no direct fire and with actual roads that is open for the transport of Russian forces. The Russians launched several armored assaults to get their forces inside the town, both from the northeastern direction, from the eastern direction, from the southeastern direction, and from the southern direction. All of this in combination to assaults from the high ground that they had captured and the fortified positions located northwest of Neskushne to enter Neskushne, and following that, an assault on Vremivka both from the southern and western direction, similar to Neskushne from the southern and western directions, from the high ground and directly towards them, to push the Ukrainian forces back from this town due to the heavy pressure and heavy fire of Russian artillery forces and FPV drones, to then push them all the way across into the central parts of Velyka Novosilka and the southern parts of it. The Russians pushed back the Ukrainians from the towns of Neskushne and Vremivka from the western direction, from the eastern and northeastern parts of Velyka Novosilka, all to be concentrated in the southern and central parts of Velyka Novosilka in a small pocket where their only retreat was across the river line through open fields towards the fortified positions of the Ukrainians, providing cover fire for the Ukrainian forces defending the town. All of this visualized with RUAF's animated video. We see in the first part the Russians were attacking from every single direction, the northeastern, eastern, southern, and western directions to push the Ukrainians back towards the town areas, then captured Neskushne, and then moved onwards towards Vremivka, as I said, from the southern and western directions, getting control over both towns, as we saw with this geolocated footage. We also saw geolocated footage of the capture of the road west of Vremivka on the 26th of December, all 3 weeks before the capture of Vremivka, so the Russians had already cut off the supplies going in and out of the town from the western direction. With this geolocated footage here, we see how the Russians also cut the road from the northern direction, and not just the road itself, but aligned their positions alongside the river line to prevent the Ukrainians from making use of the river line to cross over and free up the Novi Komar direction and free up a supply route in and out of Velyka Novosilka. So they did some preemptive strikes on Ukrainian positions. Then we see that the Russians, following the capture of Remivka and the cutting of the roads to the west and north of Velyka Novosilka, started heavily striking the town itself, as well as the Ukrainian forces, both the ones evacuating from the town, the ones coming in to support the forces stuck in the town, and the ones trying to break through the siege of the town. All of them were struck by AFU drones, artillery, and Russian defensive positions, both within Remivka as well as Novi Komar. Following this positional fighting north of Velyka Novosilka, the Russians storming it from the northern direction, gaining control of the northeastern parts and forcing the Ukrainians to push into the central parts. Then with a push from the eastern direction as well, the Russians managed to push the Ukrainians all into the pocket in the central parts of Velyka Novosilka as well as the southern parts of it. Following this, the Russians stormed through with a connection of the northern and eastern forces to cut off the southern direction from the northern direction. As we see with this footage here of Russian vehicles storming the town both from the eastern and northern directions, the Russians with these armored assaults managed to increase the amount of soldiers fighting within Velyka Novosilka exponentially, and it also allowed them to cover for their forces to gain the upper hand within the town and better positioning within the town, and this completely dislodged the Ukrainian forces within the town. And without the armored support that is necessary to deal with this new situation, the Russian forces encircled the Ukrainian forces, destroyed the southern pocket, and moved on to the northern pocket, which was now the main target and the only remaining position of the Ukrainians left within the town. The Russians continued storming the northern parts of the town, capturing position after position, raising the flag all over the town, and this led to the complete control of the town by the Russian forces. The Ukrainian forces that remained either fought until the end or were exposed out in the fields outside of Velyka Novosilka, and following that, the Russians have just recently restarted offensive operations near Velyka Novosilka from the northern and western directions. This leads us to the situation we have today, where following the capture of Velyka Novosilka, the Russian forces were fighting within the town, and since the capture of Volodar here in the east, they've managed to capture a lot of towns in between that of Volodar, Kurakhove, and Velyka Novosilka, and now the next stage begins, where the Russian forces will close the pocket west of Kurakhove and push towards the Dnipropetrovsk region, and that session has now begun with the offensive beginning here north of Velyka Novosilka and to the west of the town, in combination with offensive operations going in a western direction and continuing alongside Andrivka, Dashne, Sripne, and Kotlyarivka in the western section of the Donetsk front line. And that is going to be all for this video. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out our Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.